Something magical happens in the slow cooker when you make candied sweet potatoes. Let me tell you, I've never tasted anything so delicious. You're gonna love this recipe. Welcome to the Salted Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. And today we're gonna make a really easy recipe for slow cooker sweet potatoes that are candied. And by candied, I mean they're in a nice thick syrup. Let me just tell you, there's something that goes on when you slow cook these sweet potatoes that make them taste more amazing than any other sweet potato dish that I've ever had. And I'm not even a huge fan of sweet potatoes, and I absolutely love this recipe. So the first thing, let's talk about the sweet potatoes. These are actually sweet potatoes. I know a lot of people call them yams. Yams are something totally different. You do want to get sweet potatoes for this recipe. And I recommend getting the small ones. In my grocery store, they're labeled premium. They come in a 3-pound bag. I don't remember the brand. The brand doesn't matter, but they're premium sweet potatoes. They made a big difference in the way that they cooked and in the flavor. I also tried the recipe with the bigger ones, and it does work, but they just weren't as good. So if you can, find 3 pounds of premium small sweet potatoes, and then we just peel them and slice them up. But before we get to that step, there's a really important part of this recipe that I don't want you to skip. It's super, super important, and that is making the syrup. We're making sort of like a simple syrup with water and brown sugar. And what I found is by doing that first and then slow cooking in that thick syrup, the water that's released from the sweet potatoes thins it out just enough, but you don't end up with a thin, soupy type of candied sweet potato. You don't have to add any thickeners or anything. This works amazingly well. I'm gonna use the Ninja Foodi pressure cooker and air crisper on the slow cook function. You can use any slow cooker or crock pot, but just know that each one might cook a little bit differently. So you may need to make adjustments in your timing, okay? And in the Ninja Foodi, because we have sear saute, I can make the sauce, the syrup, I should say, right in the pot. And that makes it super easy. But if you don't have a slow cooker where you can do that, then you would do this on the stove in a pan, okay? So super easy though. So we're gonna go ahead and turn the Ninja Foodi on. It'll default to sear saute when the lid is up. High is what I want, so just hit start. We're gonna put in 1 cup of brown sugar and 3/4 cup of water. Now, let me also say that you can go up to 1.5 cups of the brown sugar and 1 cup of water. That's perfectly fine. I've done that in a recipe. I thought it was a little bit thinner. And I wasn't really sure exactly why, but you did end up with more sauce. So if you really want more of that syrupy sauce, then go ahead and go up to 1.5 cups of the brown sugar and 1 cup of water. Now we're just gonna stir this and bring it to a boil. Then I'm gonna add in 1 teaspoon of lemon juice, which it's optional in this recipe, but I do recommend it for a couple of reasons, okay? First of all, I think that a little bit of acid helps any type of sweet dish, okay, for flavor balance. But even more than that, it helps to prevent the sugars from crystallizing on you. So as they boil and we reduce this down, you're not gonna get little clumps of sugar, okay? So that's why I use it. But I bring this to a boil, then I add it in, and then we're just gonna keep cooking it until it reduces down and it gets really nice and thick. Meanwhile, I'll go ahead and prepare my sweet potatoes. Okay, so the sweet potatoes, what I do is I peel them and I slice them into 1/2-inch rounds. The size of the rounds, meaning the width, the 1/2 inch, is important in this recipe because if you cut them too thick, they're not gonna cook all the way through. They're not gonna cook evenly. And if they're too thin, they're gonna cook a lot faster, which is okay if they cook faster. Obviously, you'll get your dish done faster, but your syrup won't have as much time to reduce even further. So you may end up with thinner syrup, okay? So I like to slow cook for 8 hours on low. That is what I found worked beautifully in the Ninja Foodie. But I've also tested the recipe going on high for 4 hours. The result was good, but the sauce was a little bit thinner. I think it needs that lower heat for a longer period of time to really make it nice and thick and syrupy. All right, so that's about the width that you want them, 1/2 inch, okay? And then just throw them into the bowl. What I have found is that I can get the sweet potatoes peeled and sliced in the time it takes to make the syrup. Now that we're at a boil and most of the sugar has dissolved, we can add in the lemon juice and stir that in. And then just let it boil away while you finish your sweet potatoes. This takes about 15 minutes or so to get to the right consistency, but at any time you can turn it off. So if it's done, you could turn it off, finish peeling your potatoes. After about every 2 sweet potatoes that I peel and cut, I give this a little stir just to make sure that nothing is gonna burn, but we're not at risk of burning at this point. There's still tons of water that needs to be evaporated, so don't worry too much about it, but I do like to give it a little stir. All right, so we're getting close here to being done. I don't do a temperature on this, okay? Like you could, but I don't. If you wanted to take a temperature, you would want it to be around 235 to 240 degrees Fahrenheit. But I don't do that. I go by looks. I take my spoon and go across the bottom and I count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. When I can get to 3 Mississippi and it's still separated, I'm done, okay? That's what I do. You can do a temperature or you can just go by looks. So let's see. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, no, not quite. Okay, so keep on peeling. One Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Okay, we're done. And I can start to smell it now. And I don't want to go any further because we don't want to burn it. So we're going to turn this off. And if you're worried about it burning, like I am a little bit worried about it burning, to be honest, which doesn't usually happen. I guess I'm going a little bit slower with these sweet potatoes than normal. Take it off the heat completely, okay? So you can even just rest it up there. That way it's not going to keep heating from the bottom because this is still hot, right? So I can really smell that sugar, okay? Like on the verge of it being burnt. So I'm gonna do a little test. And hey guys, this is real life. Like I've made this 4 times already. Never burned my syrup, but it happens to the best of us. So I'm gonna take my pot here because I have a feeling I might have to start over, which, you know, at this point, it's no big deal if you do have to start over. Put a little bit of the syrup in cold water if you think you burned it. And then take it out. The texture should be, when it gets cool, it's not rock hard, but it is gonna be chewy. All right, so it's not burned, but it is close. I probably caught it just in the nick of time. So I'm gonna leave it up there and finish these sweet potatoes. Okay, so my syrup, it is thick. That is what you want, okay? Mine's dark, because remember I went just a tad bit too long, but it's gonna be perfect. I just have this feeling that this might even be better than the last batch. 3 tablespoons of butter. I use salted, but you could use unsalted if you wanted. And then 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract or vanilla paste, whichever you prefer. I'm using my homemade vanilla paste. Stir that up. Now this is gonna loosen up your syrup some, okay? Which is what we want. Oh my gosh, this looks so amazing. When you add in the vanilla paste or extract, you might start to see your syrup bubbling up. That is normal. Mine didn't do it because it was off the heat long enough, but if you time things a little bit better than I did today, you might see it bubble up. That's completely normal. Don't worry about it. No problems there. All right, now if you haven't already turned off the foodie, make sure it's off now because you don't want this to continue to boil. Number one, you'll boil out all the vanilla flavor, but number two, you'll probably burn it, okay? All right, now we get our sweet potatoes in. So I take this spoon out for just a minute and I layer them. I know this is one of those idiosyncrasies that I have. I layer them, but then I'm gonna toss them. But I layer them because I layer the seasonings on them. And I found that it works better than if you just stir all the seasonings in to the syrup. Okay, so do it this way. It's going to work out really well for you. All right, so after the first layer is in, we're gonna put our seasoning blend in. What I have here is a array of seasonings that make these candied sweet potatoes extra special. 1 teaspoon of fine grind sea salt or kosher salt, a half of a teaspoon of black pepper, 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, half of a teaspoon of ground cloves, half of a teaspoon of ground ginger, 1/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, 1/4 teaspoon of allspice. So just mix that up together really well, and then we'll start to sprinkle it over the top of each layer of sweet potatoes. And I don't always use it all, okay? So don't feel like you have to use all of it. You don't. You can save some and then you can add some at the end if you need to, or you can use it all now, whatever you prefer. All right, so I'll leave a little bit left over. That's probably about a half of a teaspoon left over, and I'll use it at the end if I need to add more seasoning, okay? Now, I know this seems so silly, but it works, okay? Layer your seasonings and then toss everything around. I know, it doesn't make sense, but when I didn't do that, it didn't work as well. And you're gonna find that it's hard to toss it around a little bit. Like you have strings of syrup, okay? Because it's cooled down now. Don't worry about that. All right. Now, because of my little mishap earlier, my syrup is cooled down so much that it's starting to harden, and so it made it more difficult. But I got some of the syrup up on the top. You can see how the seasonings kind of cling to those sweet potatoes. That really makes a difference, and it's because I did the layering of the seasoning. So don't take that shortcut of just dumping all the seasoning in because you're gonna have better results doing it this way. Now, I'm not worried about how hard that syrup is because we're going on slow cook. It's gonna heat up again. We're gonna have moisture coming out of the potatoes. It's gonna thin this out and we're gonna end up, I hope, with perfect results. So go ahead and set your slow cooker to low for 8 hours or high for 4 worked fine. Just not quite as good. And I'm gonna explain that as soon as I get this set of why I think it was better on low. Okay, so what happened during the low slow cook that I didn't get as much of in the high slow cook are 2 things. Number 1, on high, the syrup did not reduce as much, so it was a little bit thinner. Was it delicious? Yes. So that's one thing. The second thing that happened when I went on high versus low was the sweet potatoes weren't quite as roasted flavored. And that's what the magic is about this low slow cook technique. The sweet potatoes are perfectly cooked, but they're not mushy and falling apart because guess what? We don't have a lot of liquid in this pot. That is the secret with this recipe and why it works so well is because we reduce all that liquid out, make a really thick syrup, and we don't have as much steam, so we're really roasting these sweet potatoes. And let me tell you, they're amazing. So it's been about 30 minutes and I'm gonna go ahead and stir because remember my syrup was super, super hard. You don't have to do it at this point, but I do recommend stirring if you're at home while this is going on. Stir like every hour or 2. But I'm gonna go ahead and see what we have. Hopefully I don't have to start over. All right. Okay. Good deal. So we are starting to get some liquid here down at the bottom. That is really good. So we are just going to stir this up a little bit. And it is starting to warm up. Now the slow cooker on the Ninja Foodi is slow. It's slow to heat. It works great. I love it. But don't expect it to be boiling, okay? It's not going to be. All right, so I'm gonna give a good stir, get some of that syrup mixed in a little better. We're just gonna let it keep going. It's going to work, guys. I promise. Well, I better not promise because this has never happened. But it's gonna work. I have no doubt. So if you overcook your syrup like I did, you can just say, no worries. It's gonna be fine. In fact, it might be better. All right, so it's been about 2 hours. Now, in a perfect world, my overcooked syrup is going to be now way more liquidy and we can stir it and combine everything together. So let's take a peek. Okay, so I can see down in the bottom, we now have a lot of liquid. So now we're gonna stir everything together. All right, now just put them back down into the sauce as much as possible and close the lid and let them cook. Now I'm gonna scrape the rest of this that's on my spoon right in there so that it will soften and incorporate with the rest of the caramel sauce, which basically is what we made. Okay, good deal. Did you see that syrup? That's exactly what I'm talking about. These are not soupy candied sweet potatoes. They are glistening, gorgeous, slightly roasted. Even though we slow cook them, they're magical. I'm telling you, they're magical. All right, taste for seasonings, always. We still have that little bit of seasoning we can use, or sometimes you might just find that you want a little bit of salt, okay? So let's reach down in here and get a little one with some of this syrup. Oh my gosh, so good. Now, if you wanted more syrup, remember you can go up to 1.5 cups of the brown sugar, but I like them like this, okay? They're just so good. I can't tell you enough how good these are. They don't need a thing. Wow. They're so good. Even though I almost burnt that sugar. Okay, now, if you want to, you can top them with marshmallows like a lot of people like. You could serve them as is. You could put on a cinnamon crumble top and bake them. That would be delicious. But I feel like being a little fancy, so we're gonna make some meringue to go on top. Preheat your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Set these over to the side. You want 3 room temperature egg whites from large eggs, 3 tablespoons of granulated sugar. Stand mixer is easiest, but you can use a hand mixer too, and a whisk attachment. Put your egg whites in. And it's very important when you're making a meringue that you don't have any oil residue or anything like that in your mixing bowl. So make sure it's really nice and clean. You also can't have any of the yolk in here. So if you accidentally get some yolk in, either get it out or start over, because the yolk and or oil will not allow your egg whites to whip up. Then we're gonna go on high speed. One other thing I'll say is we might have leftover meringue. Don't make less, or don't try to make less than 3 egg whites, because it's not gonna whip up correctly in a stand mixer anyway. All right, when your egg whites become nice and frothy like mine are, but still have not started to form those peaks, we're gonna add in the granulated sugar with the mixer running on high speed. All right, what we're looking for is soft peaks on our egg whites. We're almost there. I could probably get away with that, but I'm gonna go just about a minute longer. You could also go all the way to stiff peaks, but it's a little harder to pipe it out onto the top of your sweet potatoes. So I like to go just a little past soft, but not quite to stiff peaks. All right, that looks good. It's probably really almost to stiff peaks because it's pretty stiff. Oh, it's good though. That's gonna be good. All right, let's get this off of here. I'm using a piping bag because I'm not gonna cover the sweet potatoes completely with the meringue, but you could. You could just take this and scoop it on and then make little peaks in there, and that's fine. But I'm gonna pipe it on because I just want it in spots, kind of like it's gonna sort of resemble marshmallows. And the flavor and the texture is kind of like marshmallows, just not as sweet, which I absolutely love. Oh my gosh. This is like the most beautiful dish of sweet potatoes I think I've ever seen. All right, here we go. This is what I mean by they're slightly roasted. See how dark the outsides are? They're roasted in that syrup. Oh my gosh, so amazing. Heavenly. And not overly sweet either. All right, now for the beautiful meringue. Spot on. So delicious. Better than marshmallows. Enjoy.